Every 4 years, us Ultimate players are given the chance to change the rules of the game. And it's that time again, so I'm going to put forward a few rules I think the WFDF Rules Committee should consider adjusting for 2025 and comment on the other popular suggestions of rules changes so far. I think it's well worth voicing what you think, and you can do that in the WFDF Rules Forum or on the Reddit post that Ruben made. Once you've heard my suggestions, you can vote on whether you agree with them with the link in the description. First on the agenda is the stall count. I want to reduce the stall count. The stall count is a really clear way we can impact the relative difficulty of offense versus defense. Right now it feels like offense is a bit too easy, particularly at the highest levels. Low turnover games are fun to reminisce on, but in the moment when there isn't a turn in a half an hour period, it's not so good for the spectator or for the D-line player who gets to play 1 or 2 attacking possessions per game. Another thing I worry about is what actions in the game define the outcome of the game. For example, the World Beach Mix Semi, we all remember Elliot Bonnet posterizing every American defender, but the most important events for the French victory, the events that tipped the scales, were Harper Garvey slightly overcooking a shot to the end zone and Luisa Maria Neves dropping a disc.
US floating it out of the hands of Neves.
I think it's good for a sport for the most pivotal moments to be the most exciting moments, which should also ideally be the most profoundly positive moments instead of people just messing up. In my opinion, there's also a huge beneficial side effect where the pace of play speeds up when the disc is live. The downsides will be more stall out calls, more turns will also cause more dead time when the disc is on the floor. At lower levels, I think the game feels much more balanced, and there's many more turnovers, but few of these turnovers are due to pressure of the stall or stall outs. The vast majority are just drops or throwaways, so there won't really be too much effect there. We also have good data on what a lower stall game looks like already. The WL is the best example. These WL games aren't complete turnover fests, but have a more fun pace of play while still feeling like normal Ultimate. I think 7 is slightly extreme for right now. I hope it's where the WFDF version of the sport ends up one day, but I'd be really happy to see the stall drop to 8 or even down to 9. Look, I don't think there should be a pick rule at all, but that's far too extreme for where player opinion is. In the past we've said that defender on defender picks should be removed, but I'm going to go a step further and suggest an even smaller adjustment to the pick rule to remove only the most egregious pick calls. This is Canada versus Japan 2016 in power pull play. Morgan Hibbert attempts to poach onto Tayo Arakawa, whose match defender is Malcolm Bryson. Bryson could call pick here, saying that Hibbert has impeded his ability to move with Arakawa, despite this very clearly being down to a strategic decision that Hibbert has made.
Good switching downfield by Morgan Hibbert.
Here's what I'm talking about in its purest form. There's a crossover between these two cutters. The red defender tries to switch, the blue defender does not. The attacker then gets past both defenders. The red defender is accelerating but not fast enough and gets in the way of the blue defender. The blue defender calls a pick because they have been obstructed in their effort to guard the cutter. Why should the defender get to stop the game and recover their position if the reason they've been put out of position is a strategical failure of a teammate? Now, the big reason given not to mess with picks is the idea that having the pick rule decreases the amount of high-speed collisions between players. I disagree with this premise, and the clip could be a good example of why. I don't really think picks prevent collisions. I think they just allow play to be stopped after collisions occur. Also, in theory, you'd hope a poaching or switching defender would have enough spatial awareness to avoid another closing defender. Hibbert doesn't here. In fact, you could maybe argue he manufactures this collision, which would be very much against the rules already. This clip isn't the perfect example, right? All I'm saying is that Bryson, the match defender, should not be able to recover his position because he was obstructed by a poaching defender. Here's an idea of the wording to implement this change. A defender may not call a pick if they are obstructed by a teammate also attempting to guard the offensive player they wish to move towards/with.
Are you coming to me?
See it here. I mean, there's a collision, but neither of those players was going to have an opportunity to stop that pass.
I also kind of don't like that it's Walsh's decision to poach into the lane that created the pick, nothing that the offense had done. So it's kind of like a bailout to be able to both lunge into the lane and also
Well,
be able to say, I should get to defend you too.
The pick rule needs to change. I mean, that's a perfect example of why it doesn't work that well, because the defense creates the problems and then gets to reap the rewards.
I think the defense has to accept the cost of I chose to poach into the lane.
Something about the pick rule I do like is the ability to delay the call by up to 2 seconds to determine if the pick will affect the play. Could all rules have this 2 extra seconds as a default? I think maybe, but the one rule that needs this 2-second buffer the most is indirect fouls. Indirect fouls are fouls that don't affect a play on the disc. One common type of indirect foul is a push-off foul. Sometimes in more physical games, push-off fouls occur that don't seem like they're going to have an effect on the game. So as a defender, you choose not to make a call, but then a couple of seconds later, the attacker uses the separation they earned with the foul to get free and receive the disc. Sometimes defenders just let this go and kick themselves for not calling the foul earlier and continue to play. Other times they incorrectly make a late foul call, which they technically can't make. I'd hope that adding the ability to delay an indirect foul call would disincentivize attackers pushing defenders away whilst beginning to move or change directions, because it would be harder to get away with. Another upside might be that fewer indirect fouls that don't affect the game at all would be called, and that means that we can keep the game flowing more. But I think really the biggest reason to make this change is to make the rules reflect how the game is played. Players are already delaying these indirect foul calls, and usually no one has a problem with that because a lot of the time as an attacker, you know you've committed a push or foul and are happy to accept the foul call, even if the call comes a second or two late. The next rule I want to change is to remove that when an offensive player and a defensive player catch the disc at the same time, the offensive player retains possession of the disc. There's a few reasons I want to change this. The first is it doesn't seem fair. It preferentially treats the offense. We managed to treat the offense and the defense the same in other rules like receiving fouls and dangerous plays, and I think we can here too. When the disc is in the air, it really feels like every player should have the same kind of chance to catch the disc. The other is a kind of more personal thing that bugs me, but this rule infects every conversation you have about who got the disc first. It feels like someone on the offensive team is always trying to make the case that the disc was caught at the same time, even when that's really incredibly rare.
In the rules of flying disc, if both players catch it at the same time, it goes to the offensive player. Hard to understand
Simultaneous catch.
when it happened.
It goes to the offense.
We do need some sort of guidance on what to do when the disc is caught at exactly the same time for examples like this, where this player is clearly trapping the disc, but the disc is still spinning. Another player then comes along and traps the disc, and shortly afterwards the disc stops spinning. These two players did catch the disc at exactly the same time, because to catch a disc is to trap a non-spinning disc. What cannot happen is that two players trap a disc at exactly the same time. That's impossible because time is infinitely divisible. What people are really often arguing is that both players trap the disc at like kind of the same time-ish. This feels to me like the real truth is that we can't decide who caught the disc first, so we should just send it back. So I'd be happy to change the rule to if the offense and defensive players catch the disc at the same time, then the player who trapped the disc first retains possession, or if the offensive and defensive players catch the disc at the same time, then the disc is sent back to the previous thrower.
It's not clear and obvious, so it's very close. So we're going to send it back.
Those are the 4 I'm interested in changing. Here are some more suggestions from the Reddit post. This user suggests more clarification on the dangerous play and blocking foul rules, particularly on the up line cut, but also on trailing player situations, which I haven't thought so much about before. They're spot on that opinions on this are very far apart, unclear and strongly held, with not a lot of clarity. On the other hand, I do think the tree analogy makes a lot of sense to me. Personally, I'm more on the side of putting the offense and the defense on a more equal standing and forcing the offensive player to have to look where they're going regularly, even whilst they are cutting for the disc. I think a general principle we need to reaffirm is whenever you move anywhere, you need to be aware of what's in the space you're entering and what's going to be in the space you're entering. For me, the worst case scenario would be a clarification here with any kind of language telling defenders to refrain from poaching the upline space. I think that would be the rules overstepping their mark. Someone suggested that defensive receiving fouls in the end zone should be treated as a goal as default instead of giving the attacker possession of the disc on the goal line, and I don't feel that strongly about this, but I would be happy to see that change made, and it kind of makes sense. Someone suggested collapsing disc space, straddle and wrapping into a single, simpler disc space rule, and I completely agree. Like, how many times have you actually called wrapping or straddle in a game? I can count both on one hand. Just needs to be worded right, and this would be a really good change. Someone said we should align with USAU on the OB pull rule and the pick continuation rule. I would be totally happy to have the USU middling rule, but I think the WFDF pick continuation rule is much fairer. A pick is a violation, and violations stop play, so if a receiver hears a pick call and they stop play, that makes total sense to me. It's like playing to the whistle in a refereed sport. Because of this, I'm happy for the pick continuation rule to stay as is. I mean, it would be nice to simplify it, but the spirit of the rule should stay as is in my opinion. Another change that people feel strongly about is toughening up the rule on double teams. I think that this play from Singapore really highlighted this problem in the rule set, and in my opinion, the idea that egregious double teaming to block a throw should return the disc to the thrower should move out of the annotation of a rule in the spirit section and should sit alongside the double team rule right there. The kind of double teams that feel unfair are the disguised double teams, right? We really shouldn't get to a place where a thrower can huck into a player 2.5 meters from them that they could see the whole way and then make some kind of credible call to get the disc back in their hands. I think this is going to be one of the trickier rules to get to a good place, but I do think it's worth trying to do something here. Like last time round, there's a sentiment that the rules should be reduced, reorganised and simplified. I agree, and I think that the big thing that the Rules Committee should aim towards would be trying to combine Section 10, 15 and 16 and arguably even 8 into a single section called Making and Resolving Calls. That would be placed right after the section on pulling and deal with all of the kind of admin-y stuff around making and resolving calls in one place. Final thing, did you know we already have confirmed changes to some of the rules in the WFDF competitions appendix? One thing that struck out to me is the number of timeouts that teams have will go from 2 per half to 2 per game. A great change in my opinion. The possibility of 8 total timeouts or 10 whole minutes of timeouts in a single game is a little ridiculous. 2 timeouts per team or 4 total in a game seems a lot more reasonable. Whilst we're at it with changing the rules in the appendix, can we just get rid of this one that says that players have to wear the same or similar hats? Like, who is the person that this rule is for? As someone who watches a lot of Ultimate, it's really handy when players wear different kinds of headgear or different coloured boots, as you can tell players apart by this, whilst they still are obviously on one team together because of their jerseys and shorts. We really just don't need this rule, guys. You can vote on my rule change suggestions in the description below and get in the comments and tell me what rule changes you think should be made. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.